All right, Zig coming in at the top. Today on the show, we have Maura, the vocalist, guitarist of the band Luna Honey. Luna Honey is an experimental dark rock trio based out of Philadelphia. But the title makes it hard to describe. Their music goes everywhere. They're a band that embraces total freedom in the studio, using crazy adaptations to instruments to make their unique blend of sound, paired with very thoughtful lyrics, and tied in with an abstract atmosphere, makes for a very thought-provoking body of work. Luna Honey has a new album coming out. It's called Bound. It'll be available on all streaming platforms on November 22nd. We're going to listen to a tune. This is the song Snarge, which we get into what that word means later in the interview, and it's pretty brutal, but this is the tune Snarge by Luna Honey. Check it. Snarge, the tune, Luna Honey, the band, the album Bound, available everywhere on November 22nd. If you dig it and you want to see it live or you want a physical copy, go to lunahoney.com. This was a super fun interview, but there were a few times that Maura's phone glitched out. The ones where you can hear it left in the interview, you can hear what she's saying. But there's times where she had to re-say it, and I cut it back in. So if it seems like it jumps a little bit at random points, that's why. Anyway, if you hear what you like, if you can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests like Maura and sharing their insight with you. And now, without further ado, this is my conversation with Maura.
That's super cool. Yeah, I've listened to, you had Hecka de Picciotto on, right? Yeah, they're pals. And then I was listening to the what's the morphine person?
Oh, Dana.
Dana. Yeah. So.
Oh, he's so cool. He's so cool.
I'm a big morphine fan, so I was like, anyway, cool.
It's so funny you bring that up to kind of like lean into stuff right now, but like I just played this show with this band Lamp, which is like my band. For some reason, my band we get thrown on like jam band bills, but we don't jam band. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like they're like, oh yeah, they kind of jam, so they put us on there. But like our songs kind of like they end in a different way, so we tend to scare people who are trying to jam out. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah. That's funny.
I gotta imagine like kind of with your guys' sound, which is like everywhere and expansive, like you guys find yourself in Bill's situations like that occasionally. But
oh yeah, it's funny. Yeah, and especially because I think we have such a wide range on albums that it depends on what album. Like if people have listened to one album, which I think is a pretty reasonable, that's already like, oh wow, you listened to anything, that's awesome. Like if people have listened to one, depending on which one they have listened to, they may have wildly different expectations. So like we did end up on like a quieter. Oh yeah, sometimes you're like, oh, I can tell you listen to like the longer kind of like, I don't want to say ambient because they have lyrics, but longer structure ones that are like less bandy, and then we show up and we're like a loud raucous band, and it's like, oh no.
It's so funny though, because like I mean with what you guys do in the amount of range you have, and it's in the world we are like today with bands and entertainment being like, if you have a song you're supposed to like make 5 reels of that, using the same hook, and it's like so. It's the opposite of creative, and it's the opposite of a real experience because you have this like kind of like already set up expectation. But the reason I bring that up, we're playing this jam band bill, and like the guys in the band were super cool, and I was talking to the drummer, and he was just going off about like, because he's from Boston, he's like, you like Boston bands? And I was like, I love Morphine, and he's like, whoa, and we got into it, and he was telling me how he like saw Treat Her Right, which was Morphine before Morphine, basically.
Oh wow,
right, and he like saw Morphine come up, and I was like, whoa, this is so cool.
Oh my gosh, that's super cool. Yeah. I didn't go, the funny thing is I didn't go out to that. I mean, I went to like local stuff, but I feel like I don't have any of those fun stories where like you get to watch like a band that got famous when they were kind of smaller and sort of incubating. And I'm always like openly jealous when I get to hear other people have those stories.
What was it? No, I agree with that. It's interesting, like, because I feel we play out a lot. I play in a band called C Level, letter C dash, and we play out a lot, and like I think we've been playing around the like same peers, like the peers that maybe have made it before we really got established, so they were already kind of in that higher up.
Yeah,
you know what I
yeah.
mean? So like, oh, of course we can't open for those guys, like
Yeah.
they don't want anything to do with us. So I guess so you're based out of Philly, and the band's kind of everywhere. So to jump into it, how did Luna Honey like formulate? What were you playing in other bands before? Were you like musically already doing stuff?
Yeah. So we started in DC. There's 3 of us who are. It's me and Ben, who plays guitar primarily, and then Levi, who plays bass primarily. And then we all met in DC. I mean, I guess the fun additional like interpersonal stuff. Like Levi and I were married at the time, and then we just like wanted to make an album. Neither of us had been in a band before. I was in my 30s, and I had like stage fright my whole life, and I also was just like nervous about playing music for people. I've been like kind of secretly writing music for a really long time, but didn't it was like a very private journaling kind of activity, and we just thought that would be a good thing to do, in that same way that, like, I don't know, like, why do people go climb mountains and stuff? Like, it just like we got the impulse, and then it just kind of needed to happen. And then we met Ben, who's been in 8 million bands. Like, I could not name them all. He's definitely like a music veteran who was recording people in DC, and worked with him on the first album, Peace Will Grind You Down, which was not, kind of at the time that was being made, there wasn't really a band. It was more just like, this is a studio project that we're working on together. And I think we just had really good chemistry working together. I definitely was like, yes, like, Ben is going to be in the band, and we're going to have a thing. And so that did eventually happen. We actually also had a sax player for a bit who was in the band. Yes, yeah. I feel like the earlier, knowing that you're a Morphine fan, the earlier stuff had more of that live and a lot of that low end, because she'd play through pedals and stuff to kind of like also pitch shift a little bit. So that was it was kind of great live when like you get this like big like death horn that come in. But yeah, that's how we got started. And then similar, life happened. The pandemic happened. We all ended up moving in different places. So Levi moved up to Philly. I moved down to Richmond. There was a divorce in there somewhere. That Ben and I actually are together now, so we live and we're all in Philly now because we got tired of commuting a really long ways for band practice, and just missed being in the same city. So we've all reconvened. Levi's like a 10-minute drive away, which was intentional, and we're definitely like a very tight unit, I would say.
That's a crazy journey just for like, that's a lot of twists and turns. Oh my God. Like, and
it's been a wild rodeo.
But it's incredible that you guys can come together, still want to come together and still do it,
Yeah. I mean, I think you hear so much band drama of things that happen, and I think having lived through a ton of I mean, it's hard to, I can imagine more band drama, but the thing is that like, if everybody likes each other and you really put the music as the priority, I really think you can get through like anything, like and all of us really care about the project and care about each other too. So, I think, if everybody's on the same footing about kind of persevering, then like there's no reason to stop.
Yeah, and it's the Ramones scenario where
Yeah,
you know what I mean, where
yeah.
like everyone saw past each other and just saw the project. But that's
yeah.
So to take it back to like when you're like kind of did you grow up with like playing any instruments or singing or any musical like outlet?
Yeah, I think my primary was church. I was in the church choir. So I had like perfect attendance in the church choir for like 5-6 years, something ridiculous, if that paints any kind of picture. Really into that. And then instrument wise, I picked up playing guitar in high school, but really just as like a way to have something to sing along to. Like I'm not like it's sort of a functional thing to be able to write songs. I've never been somebody who really picks up, like I can't pick up an instrument and like play a bunch of other people's music or anything like that. Partly just because I just never gravitated towards that, I think. But rooted primarily, I think, in singing. But yeah, no, had never really performed or been in like a group or anything as an adult. And I think really had that hole there. I think there's a lot of, you discover when you get older that no one is parenting you and no one's gonna like send you to like extracurricular activities or like remind you of the things that you like doing. And it's surprisingly easy to let like a whole decade go by and realize that you haven't been doing the things you love because you've been doing the things you need to do. So really, I think for me personally, like part of the band was trying to like reestablish like what are these things that I love that I have like a hole in my life for. I'm definitely supposed to have like a just kind of supposed to be doing this, and it's so easy to let life get in the way and forget about the things that no one is going to ask you to be doing, that you really do have to kind of like take ownership and parent yourself, that it's make time for the things that matter for you.
Yeah, and I think that's well said, and like I also agree that's an important realization because just like you said, everything piles on, and like you can get home at 5, but you're gonna be exhausted.
Yep.
Like it's important to like somehow muster that gusto to get through that exhaustion to do the thing you want to do, and I think that when you have that outlet and you have that like innate excitement for it, like that lack of energy somehow gets a second wind. But okay, so singing in choir, like that's a real interesting like just church choir aside, like just being in a choir is an interesting like because you are one of a puzzle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You were moving this whole thing along, and that's interesting with like just what I've been listening to on Bound and like some of the other records, like how you guys intertwine voicings together, even if it's not just singing. These idea of ghost melodies, and so that's interesting. That's where you come from, and like I think that's part of what makes Luna Honey's like atmospheric texture exist, and like. Did you find like kind of like when you were in choir, to kind of dive into that, did you have like one role? Were you like a tenor, soprano? Did you like find yourself kind of understanding what the other voices were doing, or just kind of like absorbing it?
I really think at that point I was just like a cog in the wider choir. I mean, I was generally singing soprano. I think my voice is a little lower now than it used to be, but there are pieces that translate really well, and I think anybody that's been I grew up Catholic, and if you can imagine kind of being in a choir loft at the back of a church and having the organ being played like suddenly and at full volume, it's like the air just shakes. It's a great feeling, and I really love that. And it's something I forgot about. I think it wouldn't necessarily immediately be apparent to people that feeling could be similar to like standing in front of an amp with like a bunch of guitar feedback, but they're not actually that dissimilar from each other. There's something about that, like, the air is moving and like the sound is alive, that you kind of get when music is really loud. That I don't know, it just does the thing for me that I need.
That's a really good comparison, because I mean, like, when you think about like all these like old rock concerts where they were like Hendrix had to bring 5 amps just to fill the room. It's that part of that thing that moves you is the physical reaction to the air moving. And when you walk in church, just those buildings are so like churches are so designed in a way that like have this crazy amount of reverb. It definitely has this sense of grandeur, right? And like to apply that like that kind of movement of music at that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. No, we're all also big Swans fans, and I think if you're it's like that's like the most extreme version of it I can think of, just because it's so it's so loud. I think the second time I saw them, I think I actually started getting like a little, it's like you can like feel it in your gut enough that you're like, I'm not sure that this is a good physical feeling. like I'm enjoying this experience, but I objectively might not feel very well. And it's just so wild to kind of think about like music being something that like starts kind of in somebody's head or wherever, and then is physically played and then travels through the air and then like actually enters your body in one way or another. I don't know. It's magic. It's great.
Well, it's super interesting because that interaction with it, that form of it, is the most kind of moving. It's the one you take away. Like, I mean, you can hear records and be moved by them, and most of us are, and that's like that's a contained version. That's like that's like an extract of it. To see it in the wild, to see it in action, where you're physically moved by something, it's another experience. And that's why, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was gonna say that's why, like, when you see some acts live, not knowing anything about them, you can be forever changed. Where, like, in a different way than if you came across the record.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And like, I think that's always that tension of like, how do you capture that live part? Like we started as a, the first record was a studio project, but then since playing live, I think that has been one of the challenges, is like, okay, like, like, and a challenge for everybody is just constantly kind of chasing that impossibility down of like, well, you can't exactly replicate the sound because it's not going to be exactly the same. So like, what can you do to kind of replicate the feeling in the recording, to try to like sort of try to communicate something like that across. This is going to be the first album. Bound is going to be the first one that we actually had the resources to be able to go to like a bigger studio space, and because we've been recording at home, and you can only get so loud, and even if you have a really nice setup, like you can only get but so loud, and the space isn't designed for it, right? So it just sounds different. If you have a giant room with giant sounds, you can get you can start to try to capture like some of that, and I was excited that we finally got a chance to test that out with this one.
Because you guys have been hustling. This is the 6th album. Like,
yes.
That's not like going back to like, when was the first one? You said 2017?
I think it came out in 2018. But
18. Okay.
We recorded it in 17.
So it really...
I'm gonna be really embarrassed if that's wrong. Yeah, okay, that's right.
Yeah. Because it's really not, that's a lot in a little bit of time comparatively, especially with a pandemic in the middle. So it's you guys have been killing it on the DIY do it yourself like way of capturing it, but Bound definitely has like a bigger like, and it makes sense now that you like explain that it was in a different studio with more of the room, but it's definitely got more of that feel.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh yeah. It's a mix. And I think some of it. This is also the first record that we have drums on it, which I was excited to add on there. I love the drum machines and stuff, but you always want to try something new. And our friend Dan Angel is his studio space is amazing, and he's like super talented. That regard, and then also he's a great drummer, so I was like, well, we gotta ask him.
Yeah. And then it was you did, so clearly he was down for it.
Yeah, and I think that, but even for the ones that don't have drums, we like set up we set the PA up in the studio, like in the warehouse, and like cranked the beats really high, and then used the various like room mics around. There's like one that's like out in the hallway, and like one like off in other rooms, to like really kind of like get the very, not just the sound of like, oh, this is the programmed beat, but like this is what it sounds like if you go to a show. Like you're gonna get like what it sounds like after it's like bounced off the walls a bit,
Yeah, that's interesting. I did this interview with this Australian musician, Jeff Lang, and like amazing guitarist. But like he also is a producer, and he was telling me one of these records he did, they reamped all the tracks in different speakers in a big room, and he like rearranged the speakers so like one speaker had the drum, like had the snare, one had like, so they had all these speakers, right? And then he placed them in this room to like make it like a live recording, because they recorded in a really small tight studio. And it wasn't like I think it was like, I can't, it was a multi like cultural genre project, so it wasn't like drums. It was like, and I could be mixing it up right now, but it like, so it was like tabla and stuff. So like he put it all in this room and like moved the speakers to create that type of sound, and that's kind of like what you guys did. And that's like an amazing way to like, that's so innovative to like add room to a recording.
Oh, I hadn't thought about doing like different one through different speakers, so absolutely going to try that. Like, like that's going to come up again. So thanks. That's a great. That's a great tidbit.
I was blown away. He wrote a book. I'm trying to remember the name of his book. It was on his Bandcamp, and there was he put it in the chapter. So when I brought it up, he really got like into like explaining it, and it was super cool. Yeah, so it's definitely a very like I have a friend who's a professional sound engineer, and he when we were younger, he was just getting started. He's like, we can just record that in the board and reamp it. I'm like, what? You know what I mean? Like, which is weird, but it always makes what you play feel weird, But for something like this, when you're trying to get more room in a recording, that's a both what you did and what Jeff did is a really like cool technique. Like,
yeah, it's I love recording. Like I think the hive mind feeling that you get when you're all kind of locked in together, and it's like, well, what if we did this, or like, what if we did this thing? And it also, I think you can like really hone in on not just the composition and arrangement of the song, but like the how different ways that you present that sound change the feeling and radically change the song. Like you can just mix something like a little different, and it's suddenly a totally different song. And that's I think like that can either be really overwhelming, because it can be, if you don't have like a really clear vision of where you want to drive to, it's like, oh no, I don't know, and then you can kind of like make a mess by kind of futzing with things too much. But like, if you have like an image in your mind, I think it also can like, it's like exercises that help you every time you make one of those little decisions. It just like hones the vision even sharper of like, yes, that's what this thing should be. And I love that feeling. I think everybody in the band loves it. Yeah, like it's definitely like our happy place.
It is those little excited like we did it moments, and like and chipping away at the block to see the figure, you know, is like it's the way you got to do it, or adding in that case. One the kind of unpin something I wanted to ask you about swans, because did you guys play with them?
No, we haven't played with them. We did we worked on an album with Norman Work, who is a former member,
Right.
and also just a delightful person.
Okay, because like I was gonna they played at a place in Cleveland not too long ago, and we had a gig right after, and like they were telling us the Swans had like really specific, and I was super bummed because I wanted to go, but it sold out. But they had specific like things for the room, like they couldn't have the AC on. Yeah. So did you experience that too when you saw them?
Yeah. I've heard the same kind of things.
Okay. Do you know
it's
why?
funny because I've heard so many different versions of theories. I wouldn't say that I know why. Somebody once told me that it's because the AC just makes it harder to sing, which is something that I can definitely vouch for.
Okay.
But I don't know. I think would be the answer. I will say that, like, you know, if the room isn't there, if you know like what conditions kind of result in your own personal peak performance, then that's probably the answer, right? Like,
Right.
and it's totally reasonable to ask for those if what people want is the best performance that you can give. Definitely, we played a show down in Mexico City, which I think was the hardest, like for me as a performer, it was the hardest one to do. Even though I love Mexico City and it's beautiful, the elevation is different. And between the elevation and I don't know, just something about, I was having a hard time breathing there. And so it was really different trying to get on stage. And then they had a lot of the fog machines, which normally
those are the worst.
They wouldn't normally bother me that much,
Yeah.
but I think the double whammy of the
lack of breathing,
the fog with the elevator, I was like, I might actually pass out. Like, this could be the show where I black out in the middle of the set. But that didn't happen, so that was good. No, I don't think anybody noticed.
But
yeah, you know, like
did,
it's easy
sure.
as an audience member, I think, to forget that there's a very physical thing happening on stage sometimes, and that like. You know, but there is.
Yeah, especially with like the voice is the worst because it's so finicky. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
But
and it's like if it's going wrong, you can't like change a string.
Yeah. A guitar can always be on G when you hit that note.
Yeah.
And if the temperature or whatever, you can readjust the neck. You can put it back to where it was. You can measure it. But vocally, you can't, or you get by. You know, it's a whole nother thing.
My big fear, you know how people have like fears that you have that dream that like, oh no, you're gonna go to school and or
your teeth fall
wherever,
out.
You forget your clothes, your teeth fall out. So my big fear, I was, like suddenly not be able to sing in the middle of a set, and then it actually happened.
Oh no. Was that the one in Mexico City?
No, it wasn't, and it was inexplicable. There wasn't anything bad going on. I don't really know what happened. It was in the middle of tour. Maybe we're just tired, getting sick, something. And I was like, well, I guess we're pivoting, and we're just gonna do like a really sultry,
Spacey
whispery thing for the rest of your. And nobody noticed, which was wild. But I guess, like, it's hard to tell the difference between what's an artistic decision, maybe, and what is you panicking on stage trying to come up with a plan B.
Which is the good thing about art.
Yeah.
It's subjective. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, well, but I'm sorry, you're about to say something about swans, and I think I asked you about the AC thing that I heard.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I find that stuff interesting too. Well,
I guess, so you guys worked with Norman, right? So what did that process look like? And like, how'd you end up linking up with him?
Yeah, it was, it's kind of hard to remember back now because it seemed so implausible. And it's not like, basically, we're really big fans. I had been listening to a bunch of his solo work, which I just really love. My mom had passed away in 2020, and there's just some music that I turned to just kind of like get through that. And so I was like obsessively listening to his music as a result, because it was helping. And he dropped me a note, which really was kind of out of the blue. Like, I thought I was losing my mind because I was like, well, I've been listening to this thing on repeat and I haven't been sleeping, and I'm getting an email and I don't know that this is real. But he said that he'd be, it'd be nice to work on something together, which I was really happy with, but like, it wasn't super formalized, like what that could be. So we just like kind of remotely were trading things back and forth. So the first side of Aftermath is the album that we worked on together. The first half is really stuff where we had sent him something and then he kind of responded to it and sent it back to us. And then the second half, which is like the one really long piece on there, the second half of the side B is all one piece. That was originally a live performance that he had done that he sent back to us, and then we added things on top of there, and added lyrics and stuff. And just because of, I think, the way that I work, I was kind of grouping things together as though they would be an album, but there wasn't really a discussion about an album until everything was done. So yeah, that one did just kind of materialize out of the stars aligning, I guess. And it was, I'm so grateful to him because like I personally was in a not great space, and even just like, the band had already been through a lot at that point. And it was, it was the middle of the pandemic. There's just a bunch of bad stuff that had happened, and it was starting to feel like maybe this music thing was like, I think many musicians were having sort of a identity crisis about what they were doing with themselves maybe during the pandemic. You either were like being really productive. I think you can be really productive and have, a crisis at the same time. So
maybe they fuel both ends of that. I feel like, because I agree with that.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. Like, you'd see people either like thriving in like, I got all this time, here's 9 more albums, or like, or or just like streaming a bunch or trying to make it work, or the opposite, like, what have I been doing? You know what I mean?
Yeah. But for me, I think that definitely shook me out of that, and having that to work on together. It's like, I think if you had asked me at that moment who would I most want to be working with on a new piece, it probably would have been him. So for that to just kind of happen out of nowhere felt, I don't know, it felt like the universe was like, all right, we know we've dealt you some bad cards here, like, here's a break. Like,
that's amazing though, and it's crazy how stuff like that happens.
Yeah.
I totally
Yeah.
relate to that because my mom passed away in 2021, and and my bass player, his grandparents passed away around the same time. So we,
Yeah.
as a group, have been kind of grieving, and we've been working on this crazy project, like kind of encapsulating that in a way, and like it's a weird, but like what's the word I'm looking for? Weird, but like kind of healing and kind of like
Yeah.
void filling and like gratifying way to like kind of experience it. That probably is only going to make sense to us, you know, and I'm sure like
Yeah.
how that record will probably only make sense to you in a way, with like the impact it has, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's when I read that, I was like, that's really cool that you had that outlet during that time to do that.
Yeah, and I think I know for me, I don't know if that process of doing that was like really important because it feels at the end of it like you can put this thing over there and you can like you have a physical thing, the record that you can put over there and you can pick it up or you can put it down. Kind of based. Yeah.
It's like a different type of memorial or monument.
Yes.
That's what I'm looking for. A
Yeah.
different type of monument, because it's like it's not just the grave, you know, but it's a thing that can be revisited in a way that's tactile and like
Yeah.
positive from this shitty situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can say things that I think are a little harder to say than just words, right? You know, because you
Right.
can say an awful lot with in the in between with the music, to kind of both maybe capture things you're feeling or also sort of lay a groundwork, lay some structure that are a path away from what you're feeling. Yeah, and we ended up both. So Aftermath was after my mom died, but there's Branches, the um, other kind of longer form, less bandy one, is like another kind of death related album that came before it. So it felt funny to have these, you know, it felt like a continuation and an answer in some ways to this other one.
Well, with Branches, that
Mhm.
like I read that, but that was your aunt, right?
Yeah. You know, and my aunt and I were not close, which sort of made it stranger. Like I hadn't talked to her in a really long time, and we got a phone call. I think it was Christmas Eve. And she asked me, she said that she only had a couple months left to live, and then she asked me to write her some music.
Which is which is an insane,
Yeah.
like pressured ask. Like, holy
Yeah.
shit! Like,
Yeah.
oh my god. Which I mean, I think it's a very beautiful thing for her to want to have, you know, to share, to do something creative and like reach out to you and respect what you're doing. You know, to want to have a way to contribute to that and have you contribute to her. That's a beautiful moment, but also a lot of pressure.
Oh yeah.
God.
Yeah. Also, because I was like, wait, have you listened to our music?
Yeah.
Are you sure that you want this? Because, you know, it's not like sweet lullaby music or anything. Like it's, I don't necessarily think of it as in dark, but I think it's generally in the world of music, darker music. And not really trying to be. It's just kind of how it comes out. So I was like, well, it's going to come out dark, probably, whatever it is. She told me to, you know, not to worry about it, but to go out on the tiny branches, which is why it's called Branches. But yeah, it was weird to have those come so close together. Because my aunt and my mom both passed the same year, and they were
Oh, man.
sisters.
Yeah.
So it was just a 2020 crazy year.
Holy shit. Yeah. To say the least. Oh, well, I'm so sorry about all that.
That's
Like,
okay. I mean, I think we were all having a hard time collectively
yeah,
as a society. So the weird thing is when you personally are also just personally going through a rough time, it's it it sort of feels like you know, somehow the whole world is grieving with you, which I feel like, you know, it must be very different from what that must be like when the rest of the world seems like they're fine.
yeah.
I don't know.
No, that's a really interesting point because, in a really down time like that, it's just everyone's down, everyone's going through
Yeah.
shit. Like,
Yeah.
because when you're grieving like that, it feels like that. It's not actually.
Yes.
It's usually not actually like that. Like,
Yeah.
that's a really interesting point, and like kind of in a way, maybe like a way to fully kind of embrace that grief.
Yeah. You know, I did feel a little like I was losing my mind during that period just because there were so many internal feelings that also
Yeah.
seemed to be externalized in the world.
Yeah.
You know, that feed into that idea that like, oh, the world isn't real. It's just like a projection of what you're thinking. And like, at the moment, it's a projection of what I'm thinking. Like, um, but not really. I mean, I did, you know, like, and I think, you know, it's interesting now kind of moving out of that period. It's left us with a lot of questions of, you know, what's important to us, like how do we do things now, kind of like knowing, you know, I don't think back to, you know, quote, unquote, normal, nor do I think that they ever will be because we have all gained new knowledge, right? So
Right.
it's that process of rebuilding a new version of yourself after the bad times, and that self just doesn't look the same. You know, music I think isn't going to look the same, our venues aren't going to look the same.
Yeah.
So like what does getting back to, like, are we at the point where we're back to the new normal, or are we still getting there? You know, I think we're still kind of too close to it to be able to tell.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that. Like, I think it's moving into like wherever it's going to be, but for the most part, you know, there's some things that just still came up then and still reside from then, you know?
Yeah.
And like, I guess, so with both those kind of heavy, with all that heaviness going on, like, and that kind of, like how you said, it puts a perspective on what matters.
Yeah.
And, you know, it really kind of builds this strength within you, or I shouldn't say you, within oneself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to use my I words, like, but I know you know what I mean, but I'm trying to correct myself for anyone who's listening. But it puts this like kind of strength within oneself to kind of like endure other situations or get past certain things. So like with what you kind of touched upon earlier with some of the like kind of heaviness with just the band dynamic, did these projects help everyone kind of navigate through that?
I think one of my frustrations with for both Branches and Aftermath is because they were so emotionally charged and because we were physically in different locations. Levi really wasn't able to play on them.
Okay, as much. Gotcha.
Yeah, so we still consider it you know, it's still part of the output of the band, but I think that, you know, in terms of solidifying and moving past something, you know, this upcoming album, like in the process of making it, I think is the one that really feels like kind of not like triumphing through like a period when it's harder to do things, but like, man, it's so freeing to just be able to like drive across town and have practice, or like, oh, I have an idea, like let's go record something really quick and we're all here. It doesn't have to be like, okay, well, like what weekend 3 weeks from now are you available that we will all be able to take off of work and and meet up and then hope we're all feeling inspired that day. You know, it's this really feels to me, you know, like to me this one feels like aha, like we've come through it and we're back on track and we're where we need to be and
bound together, I guess.
Bound together. Yeah.
But no,
I did like the wordplay of
yeah.
of bound both being somewhere that you're going and also something that you're tied to. It's sort of like two opposite meanings, sort of at the same time.
Wow. Yeah, no, I do like to kind of like dive in the words like that, but I didn't do that with this. That makes a lot of that's really interesting. That's really cool. So to kind of dive into Bound a little bit with the tune Vacuum or Vacuum Cleaner,
Vacuum cleaner.
being an aria, like
Uh-huh.
that's really cool. Like, did you like dive into opera at all, or like were you like, because that's a specific structure, you know?
It is. I do like opera, and I am not that kind of a singer. That's kind of my version of it. Um, and like I, so that song is funny because the music to that song is actually very old. Ben and Levi recorded them kind of like messing around with that beat and like the guitar and the feedback and everything in like, gosh, was it 2019, maybe something like that. Like it was a while ago. And as soon as I heard it, I had kind of an idea for how I feel like there's usually like two buckets. Like there's like the music bucket that you pull from for, oh, this is like, I have this like kind of sonic idea. And then you have the concept bucket that you pull from for like, oh, I want to write about this kind of thing. And I had an idea for how I wanted to sing that song. Like I could kind of hear it, but it seemed really absurd. I was like, that's a ridiculous idea. Like that's not real. And then after a while, you're like, we do try to not back off from those absurd ideas, like collectively, because I think, we all have crazy ideas and it's easy to talk ourselves out of them. And I think you should always do them. You can decide after the fact that maybe that was a bad idea, but you should definitely go for the crazy idea, like first and primarily. Like, if nothing else, you're going to learn something about like why that was your crazy impulse. But that sat around because I just like couldn't figure out the lyrics that were supposed to fit with this style of singing up until this year. And then I was like, oh yeah, no, I know now. It's about a vacuum cleaner. Like which is sort of funny to think that something might need to percolate for several years to get, to its proper form of absurdity. But and that's really I think that's the only song we have like that that's really taken that long to kind of come to fruition. But yeah, no, I generally do really love opera. Like going back to that idea of like the liveness of things. Like if you go see live opera, like I think it makes a lot more sense about like you do get that same kind of like shivers up your spine thing when those high notes are hit. And, yeah, I do. I do like that. So I think it snuck in there just because it's like, well, that's one of the things that's like dumped in the subconscious is, there's that happening somewhere. I don't know about you. I was at a friend's house a couple weeks ago. We were going around talking about the random songs that get stuck in your head. They're usually not even the whole songs, but just snippets of songs. Like for me, one of them is that 80s cartoon, The Gummy Bears. The theme song from that haunts me. And I don't know why. It's horrible. But every now and then you just wake up one morning and the Gummy Bears theme song is in your head. And Vacuum Cleaner got stuck in my head for weeks. And it was, that is not, it's a great song. It is not a catchy song. I don't know what was going on. Like, it was oppressively stuck in my head. But I think that that's usually a good sign when that happens, that like you sort of unlocked the door in your own skull that song was trying to come out from,
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's always like little hooks or little angles or runs or lines or whatever it may be that stick out, And
yeah,
I kind of relate to that because like in a way that's kind of how I learned music. All right, I didn't learn a whole song, but I learned like the one riff and then the other riff. You know what I mean? Like or fill in the blank and like that. So I relate to that in that sense. Like, but it is always like the weirdest. Like so with the kids I work with, I show them this guy, the Kiffness. Do you know this dude? He's this YouTuber, and he'll take like little weird animal sounds. Like, so if a cat makes a weird like sound, and he'll make like a dance remix out of it.
Oh no, I have seen that. Yeah.
And they're usually funny and like, oh my god, that was, because of my work and because of like how good he is at making these. Those are grilled in my brain and come up in normal conversation. So yes, I relate to that.
Yeah. I really love it. I think that's a fun topic of conversation too, is to ask everybody with. It doesn't have to be a bunch of musicians. Like there's a lot of people who are just like haunted by like little snippets of things, and it's so fun to hear what obscure, strange things are stuck routinely in people's heads.
Oh man!
And they don't match necessarily people's personalities that you think either.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I want to start a side podcast.
Oh yeah.
That happens in October, and it's gonna be called Haunted by Hooks, and like,
oh nice.
Look at that, yeah, we got this.
I'm down. I'm there. It'll be the most evil podcast that's ever been.
Right.
Because then we're all just also going to have those same ghosts like imparted upon us.
Oh, and everyone has to bring it and then dissect it somehow. That would be a sick podcast for a niche group.
That's great.
Oh, okay. If this happens, we'll work it out. Another track I wanted to ask about. I'm trying to remember the name. It was the sixth song. I really loved it.
Snarch?
Yes, Snarch. Like, that was a really like that low, just kind of groove track on there, like that on the toms and the lyrics on that and the harmonies. That was I really like that song.
Cool. I'm glad you like that one.
Can you kind of tell me the narrative, the story about how that one came into fruition?
Sure. Snarge had like a couple of, well, I guess there's sort of the lyric way of describing it, and then there's the music way of describing it. But I'll start with the lyrics because they're fun, I think, on that one. So Snarge, for anyone that doesn't know, is the official term for the like bird slurry that results when birds get sucked into airplane engines.
Oh
yeah,
God.
It's so gross. And I wasn't gonna debate the name of it. It's like Snarge. It's like we're going out west. Snarge. It's kind of a weird word, but it's so fun to Google it and then realize that that's what that means. That I wanted to gift that to
the world,
to others. It's also got references to purple martins in there. So purple martins are these birds that Native Americans used to in gourds up near their crops so that they would roost there and eat all the insects and stuff. And for years, this was handed down, and people have been doing it ever since. But the birds, in the meantime, lost the ability. It's something unique to that bird that they are, at least on the east coast of the U.S., they're entirely dependent on to put up these nesting sites. And the people who put the nesting sites up are called the birds, and they're slowly dying out because they're really worried because the age of most of the landlords it's older. Younger people aren't really taking this practice up, and it's unclear what's going to happen if we stop putting the bird's nest up. Like, it's just going to die. Like, what's going to happen? So the population of birds has been going down, and I think it's a really interesting idea or example of our relationship with nature, where that's both symbiotic. It was a symbiotic kind of beneficial relationship between us and the birds for a really long time. But then when one of that relationship sort of breaks the agreement. Like, where does that leave everybody? Like, you know, the overall concept of that song, there's a lot of kind of like thinking our relationship with nature, and that like we don't even really have, like, our concept of nature is pretty warped because most of the nature all of us experience is not truly natural. Like, I'm looking out my window right now at a bunch of paper mulberries, which are invasive, right? They're not supposed to be there, but they're here because we used to make paper out of them. So they're these ghosts of former necessary things that live around us that are now, you know, invasive, that I just think are really fascinating because we've forgotten them, and we're forgetting so much about, like, sort of the unnatural natural world, like the natural world as we shaped it because we needed it at one point in time, but we don't really need it anymore. So, or we don't need it in the same way, or we don't need certain parts of it, as we've kind of shifted to technology and made progress and things. And I think about that whenever I look, you know, especially some of these that we brought over for a reason, and you know we should because they're causing problems. But I just think the tension in that is just an interesting thing to explore. So that's kind of where that song is.
Okay, all right, it's fascinating, and it's a brutal term. Oh my god! But like, so it sounds like with I guess with your process, do you kind of like just research things that fascinate you, and then it kind of pours out in a tune, or like was it from this one word that this whole line of kind of research on birds and like that it kind of fell out?
I will rabbit hole in something really hard.
Okay.
I will. And so I think it depends, but because I have that tendency to like suddenly decide to look at bird stuff for days on end on the internet late at night, that like, you know, that does end up frequently, like, the results of those rabbit holes they do turn into songs a lot of times, and it's fun kind of fodder for that. It's not like every song is that, but
Right.
But a lot of them, you can kind of see the rabbit hole in the song, even because like there's the other half of it is kind of references to starlings. I think this one actually started because I was trying to look up the history of starlings in the United States, because there is a popular idea that starlings were released here as part of this person's attempt to release every bird from Shakespeare into the United States.
That's crazy. And oh my god.
It is crazy, yeah. And you will hear it over and over and over again, but it is actually also apparently not true, which they didn't know until I think this year or something. So in the process of me trying to go back to get details about this story that I had been taught was true at one point in time, I discovered that it was not in fact true, and that like we've basically just been repeating it as fact since what, like the 1950s or something like that, with no fact checking whatsoever. So there's like a ton of like newspaper like but yeah, so you know, if you go back and you look in newspaper articles, like kind of fluffier newspaper articles, you can find all these like references where they've talked about the fact that the birds were introduced as part of, you know, somebody trying to release all the birds from Shakespeare here, and then it's this like repeated thing where because it was in another article, then another article will refer to it. And I guess nobody ever really put the energy into fact checking whether this was true, because like, I don't know, like there's a lot of things to do, like who's really fact checking
birds,
starling, you know, trivia. But the fact that it isn't actually true, and it's like disprovable because the original, gosh, where did I read this article? I'm now forgetting it, but there was the article kind of like unveiling that this was not true. They went back and they did find the original source where, you know, this idea came from, and the timelines just don't match up. Like the starlings were already here. So it's just you know, it's also kind of that idea that like the world as we perceive it is a collection of stories that we have retold, and pieces of those stories are not necessarily true, right? But that we will never really be able
to know because,
them.
Yeah, because it's also like that, how the nature isn't actually natural. That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Maura, I really appreciate your time, and I've loved getting to dive into your work. I have one more question. So you're friends with Hacking to Picciato. Can you tell me how you know those guys? Because I've interviewed them a bunch. They're both so sweet, and I'm about to talk with them again next week because they put out a new record.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited. So we played with them when they came through DC, when we were still living in DC before the pandemic. They came through and we played. We opened for them, and then it was this really magical weekend, actually, because they were going down to Richmond, Virginia, the next day. Or maybe it was a day. Anyway, they were going down the next day, and we were going down to Richmond the next day to record as part of this. It's like a sort of experimental John Cage. Let's throw a bunch of John Cage tribute to throw a bunch of musicians together, and then
that's cool.
Kind of draw things from a hat to see who would play together on different tracks, and so we were doing that down there, and so we were like, we're going to be down, like let's get brunch. We went to Guar Bar. I'm from Richmond originally, so this was also a kind of funny. It was funny to be back in my hometown with them, and just had a lovely weekend, I would say. And I have kind of I'm always happy when we have a chance for our paths to cross. They are not in the U.S. that often, so it's been a minute. But I just absolutely love Danielle is such a sweetheart. And Alex is great. They're just really lovely people. They're some of my favorite people I've met doing this so far.
They're so sweet, and they're so inspiring, and they're so smart. Well, Maura, thank you so much for chatting with me. I really appreciate and you taking time to talk, and I appreciate you digging into some of the other interviews. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Keep up thanks for doing the Lord's work. It's it really does. I wonder sometimes, what it's like kind of hosting a podcast, because in some ways it seems like it must be similar to putting an album out, that like you put something out and you're not necessarily going to see everyone that's listening to it. Right. So there is kind of a like tossing it into the void feeling.
Oh yeah.
But
that's my whole life is in the void.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy.